We're continuing in chapter 2. So we remember last time, just to remind ourselves, we were adding signed numbers. Okay, if you add a positive number, you move right on the number line. If you add a negative number, you move left. And the key thing to remember is this this rule for adding two signed numbers. So if you're adding two numbers with the same sign, you add the absolute values and keep the sign. So for example, adding two negative numbers, that's always negative. But case B, if you're adding two numbers with different signs, then you subtract the absolute values and use the sign of the number with a larger absolute value. All right, and we looked at lots of examples. Also in the book. Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention. Yeah, if you're adding a lot of signed numbers, a nice way to do it, since addition is associative and commutative, you can move all the negative numbers, say, to the right, all the positive numbers to the left, and add all the positive numbers first. So here, for example, these are the positive numbers. Okay, so if you add these first, you get 270. And then there's these four negative numbers. Okay, so if you add negative numbers, you're adding the absolute values and keeping the sign. So add those negative numbers, and you're really getting negative 436. Okay, so this is a nice way to do this question. So now you're back to just adding two numbers. And yeah, here it's a positive and a negative, so subtract the absolute values. So 436 minus 270 is 166. And use the sign of the number with a bigger absolute value, so that'll be negative 166. All right, so again, just the moral, if you're adding a bunch of signed numbers, add the positive ones separately, add the negative ones separately, and then add those last two numbers to get the answer. All right, so here, yeah, getting on to the next section, subtracting signed numbers. Okay, yes, so we saw if you're adding a negative number, you move to the left, but that's really the same thing as subtracting. So subtracting moves you to the left. So what I'm trying to say here is that you get 2 plus negative 3 is negative 1. So starting at 2, adding negative 3, move left 3 units, you get to negative 1. But if you start with 2 and subtract 3, you're also moving left 3 units, ending up at negative 1. All right, so really we're doing the same thing here. So here's our rule. So subtracting a number is the same as adding its opposite. So remember from last time, the opposite of a number, you just switch the sign from positive to negative or negative to positive. Okay, so subtracting 3 or subtracting positive 3 is the same as adding the opposite of 3, adding negative 3. So yeah, it's a bit confusing, but we'll get used to it. And the idea is every subtraction question, you can convert it into a simpler addition question using this rule. Example 1, find negative 12 minus 24. Okay, so I've written it the same thing, but using parentheses. So just to emphasize, we've got two numbers here, negative 12 and 24, and the operation is subtraction. So yeah, a common mistake is to use the wrong operation, but here the operation is subtraction. So just to emphasize, it's the quantity, the number negative 12 minus the number 24. So we'll hit this with the rule. So we want to change that subtraction to an addition. Okay, so subtracting 24 is the same as adding the opposite of 24. That's negative 24. Okay, so that's our idea. So we converted a subtraction question to an addition question. And now we can use our ideas from the last section. So now we're back to adding. So these two numbers have the same sign. So add their absolute values, that's 36, and keep that negative sign. So the answer is negative 36. Okay, and yeah, you see what happened here. So the first number didn't change, that negative 12 didn't change, so we kept that the same. This subtraction changed into an addition, and this 24 changed into its opposite. So yeah, it's this keep change idea. But I prefer if you remember this rule. Subtracting is the same as adding the opposite. So subtraction gets changed to addition, and the second number changes to its opposite. Example 2, we have 34, and we're subtracting negative 19. So yeah, the way to read this would be 34 minus negative 19. What's the operation? It's subtraction. Okay, so we change it to addition. And what's the opposite of negative 19? I'll just switch the sign. We get positive 19. All right, and this, so this question turns into a much easier question, just 34 plus 19. Yeah, on the homework, don't forget to show your work. So it's 4 plus 9 is 13. Write down the 3, carry the 1. 1 plus 3 plus 1 is 5, so 53 is the answer. Yeah, I'm keeping the sign, so these These were both positive, so the answer is positive. And yeah, one thing to notice here, yeah, this pattern is shows up a lot whenever you have a minus and a minus inside parentheses here. Yeah, it's like they cancel. It's like you can think of it as the opposite of the opposite. You're back to just positive. Okay, so you should always be expecting this pattern, two minuses like this, turn into a plus. Okay, example 3. Okay, so now we have 19 minus 64. So it's definitely a subtraction question. All right, so it's the number 19 minus the number 64. Okay, so keep the 19, change the subtraction to an addition, and change 64 to its opposite. Yeah, I guess a common mistake is to forget one of the changes. Yes, if you just change this to an addition, but forget to change this to a negative 64, you'll get 19 plus 64. That's not going to be the right answer. Okay, now we can see we're in a what I'm calling case B situation. We're adding two numbers with different signs. So you subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger. So it's 64 minus 19. We're back to subtracting whole numbers. So 4 minus 9, well, the 9 is too big, so I have to borrow 1 from the 6. So change that 6 to a 5, borrow 1, 110, so this 4 turns into a 14. Okay, so after borrowing now it's 14 minus 9 is 5, and 5 minus 1 is 4. So this subtraction, we get 45. We have to use the sign of the number with a bigger absolute value. That's the negative 64. So the answer is negative. Okay, so you could think about this on the number line. If you start at 19, subtract 64, so move 64 units left. Same thing here. If you're adding negative 64, you're still moving left. Where do you end up? Well, you start at 19, you move left, you pass 0, but then you keep going another 45 units. So you get to negative 45. Okay, so you can always think about these on the number line, but to actually get the numbers, it's good to use those rules, adding or subtracting the absolute values. Okay, yeah, of course you can't check on your calculator, so if you put this in your calculator, you'll get negative 45, but I'd like you to be able to do it by hand. Yeah, this one's trickier to put in a calculator. Let's see what we have here. So we have negative 39, that's the first number. And we're subtracting another negative number, negative 43. Yeah, so I guess this is the most complicated case. So negative 39 minus negative 43. Keep that negative 39. And we're going to change this subtraction to an addition. And we need the opposite of negative 43, that's 43. So changing the subtraction to an addition, we get this equivalent expression. We're back to adding sign numbers. We need the absolute values. The signs are different, so subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger, so it's 43 minus 39. Need to do some borrowing, but the answer is 4. And is the answer positive 4 or negative 4? Well, the number with the larger absolute value here is positive, so the answer is positive. Yeah, I mean the original number was negative, but this, it's once we've got it to this addition question, now you can kind of forget about the original numbers. Our rule for adding sign numbers says it's the sign of the number with a bigger absolute value in this situation, right? So don't use the original numbers. It's, you know, we can kind of forget about the subtraction when we get to this addition stage. So it's these two numbers. We're adding negative 39 and plus 43. All right, so the answer is 4. Yeah, if this showed up in a word problem, example 5, the question is to subtract 16 from 3. So it's easy to get this wrong and say that that's 16 minus 3. We're subtracting, but here if you're subtracting 16 from 3, that really means start with 3 and subtract the 16. Okay, so we're taking 16 away from 3. All right, so just remember, yeah, the order gets switched. So subtract 16 from 3, start with 3 and subtract 16. So it's really this question, so it's the same as 3 plus negative 16. The absolute values are 3 and 16. Subtract the 3 from the 16. We got 13. The negative 16 had the bigger absolute value, so the answer is negative 13. Okay, that makes sense. So if you start at 3 on the number line and move 16 units to the left, yeah, you're ending up at negative 13. Okay, one last one. A bigger number here. Subtract negative 345 from negative 8. Okay, yeah, we have to be a bit careful here. Okay, well, like before, we're starting with negative 8. And here's the subtraction. We're told to subtract this number. Okay, so we're subtracting a negative. Okay, so we're not subtracting 345, we're subtracting negative 345. So you definitely have to do these carefully. All right, so change this to plus. change negative 345 to its opposite. That's 345. So this is the addition question. Negative 8 plus 345. Two different signs. So subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger. So we need 345 minus 8. If you do that, that's, did I do this right? 337. And the number with the bigger absolute value is positive, so the answer is positive 337. All right, so yeah, I hope that made sense. Yeah, it's definitely confusing. Things like subtracting negative numbers, but just remember, if you're subtracting a negative number, you're really just adding a positive number. Okay, next operation. So we've looked at adding and subtracting. How about multiplying? In fact, it turns out multiplying signed numbers is a lot easier than adding. Here's the rule. So if you're multiplying two signed numbers, really you just multiply the positive parts, just the absolute values, and then adjust the sign to be positive if the two numbers have the same sign, and negative if the two numbers have different signs. All right, so a positive number times a positive number is positive. A negative number times a negative number is also positive. They have the same sign, two negatives. But if you multiply it positive by a negative or negative by a positive, the answer is always negative. All right, so you can see that's different from addition. So if you're adding two numbers with different signs, then you have to see which number has the bigger absolute value, use that sign. But we don't do that here for multiplication. It's just if the two numbers have different signs and you multiply, the answer is always negative. All right, and this is just for two numbers, so just multiplying two numbers, two sign numbers together. Yeah, where does this rule come from? So just a quick look in the book. Yeah, so here's subtracting sign numbers, and it's the same rule. So subtracting A from B. So keep the B, change the subtraction to an addition, and use the opposite of A. So, yep, more examples here. And yeah, for multiplying, so yeah, 3 times 4 is, you're adding 3 4s together. So yeah, 3 times negative 4 means you're adding 3 negative 4s together. So that's certainly negative 12. So that makes sense. So if you multiply a positive by a negative, you'll always get a negative. Multiplication is supposed to be commutative, so you're supposed to get the same thing if you put the negative 4 first. Negative 4 times 3, so that'll also be negative 12. So here you had, so to justify, so y is a negative times a negative positive. Yeah, I mean, it's really the only thing that you can do for this all to be consistent. So yeah, if you follow this pattern, the next number has to be 3, then 6. But yeah, the real reason is so that this just distribution idea works for any numbers, positive or negative. So for this rule to be true, this is really what forces a negative times a negative to be positive, this distribution rule. Okay, but the rule itself is easy to remember. Example 1, find negative 2 times negative 5. Okay, so here we're emphasizing that the operation is now changed to multiplication. So negative 2 times negative 5. Well, the positive parts of these two numbers are just 2 and 5, and the product is 10. And these two numbers have the same sign, so the answer has to be positive. So the answer is positive 10. And this question could have looked different. Yeah, we didn't. We could have taken away that cross. So this is the same question, so this also means multiplication if you don't see an operation. So this also means negative 2 times negative 5. We can drop the parentheses around the first number, so this also means negative 2 times negative 5. But yeah, you can't drop the second parentheses. So this is different. So this means negative 2 minus 5. So this is not the same. This is a subtraction question. So the answer here would be negative 7. But these two are equal to positive 10. Okay, so that's just the notation to be careful of. So whenever you're doing any question, just make sure you're using the right operation. Example 2. Yeah, another way to see multiplication is a dot up here. So this means negative 14 times 9. So multiply the absolute values. I can't do this in my head, so it's 14 times 9. 9 times 4 is 36. Carry the 3. 9 times 1 is 9, plus the 3 is 12. So when you multiply the absolute values, you get 126. But here we're multiplying two numbers with different signs, so the answer is negative. So negative 126. Okay, so the first example, we had two numbers with the same sign. The answer was positive. The second example, two numbers with different signs. So the answer is negative. And you're always multiplying you're always kind of ignoring the signs, multiplying the positive parts of the two numbers together. Example 3, just some bigger numbers. So this is negative 92 times negative 300. Yeah, and negative should be bigger, but we're multiplying here, we're not subtracting. Yeah, right away it's a negative times a negative, so the answer will be positive. These two numbers have the same sign. And then it's a little bit of work to actually do the multiplication. So yeah, 92 times 300. This is one way to do it. Yeah, so multiply by the 0 first. So 0 times 2, 0 times 9, 0 times anything is 0. Multiply by this 0 in the tens column. We're still getting 0, but now the 0 goes here. And here multiply by 3 in the hundreds column. So we get 3 times 2 is 6. So the 6 has to go in the third column, the hundreds column. And 3 times 9 is 27. All right, then add these three, 0, 0, 6, 7, 2. So the product is 27,600. Yeah, maybe it's clearer to do it this way. So put the 300 on the top, multiply by 92. Remember, multiplication is commutative. The order doesn't matter. And so do it this way. Yeah. 2 times 0, 0. 2 times 3 is 6. And then 9 times 0, that 0 goes here. Yeah, so this on the homework, forgetting to move this this guy into the tens column. 9 times 0 is 0, 9 times 0 is 0, 9 times 3 is 27. And add these, yeah, you'll get the same answer. And so the answer is positive 27,600. Another example, 4. So here we have 0 times negative 516. So we're multiplying two numbers. Do they have the same sign or different signs? Yeah, well, kind of 0 is a special case. 0 doesn't really have a sign. It's not positive or negative. So we can't really use the rule, but there's a simpler rule. Anything times 0 is 0. So the answer is 0. Okay, so yeah, it doesn't matter what you multiply by 0 or 0 by, the answer is always 0, so that's easy. All right, so this example here, so now we're just multiplying more than two numbers together, but we can do it step by step. Okay, so you can think of these three multiplications. For multiplications, we go from left to right. So we'll do these two first. Negative 2 times negative 6. 2 times 6 is 12. And negative times a negative is positive. Okay, so this piece, do this first. This becomes a 12. And then we get, this is what's left. Then we'll do this part next. This is a positive times a negative, different signs, so the answer is negative, and 12 times 10 is 120. So we get negative 120, and then we'll do this this last multiplication last on the right. A negative times a positive is negative 360. Yeah, so this was just 3 multiplications. And there's a nice fact: if you're multiplying a lot of sign numbers together, you can tell what the sign of the answer is going to be. You just have to count how many negative factors there are. So yeah, every time you multiply 2 negatives together, you get a positive. All right, so these 2 negatives, it's like they canceled out, and there was one negative left over. And so what matters is, do you have an even number of negative factors or an odd number? If you have an even number of negative factors, the answer will be positive. And if you have an odd number of negative factors, the answer must be negative. We saw that here. Here there are 3 negative factors. 3 is an odd number, so right away we know the answer will have to be negative. Yeah, this last example. So multiply these sign numbers together. So we have 7 numbers here, but how many are negative? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we have 6 negative numbers, 6 negative factors. 6 is an even number, so the answer has to be positive. And if you multiply the absolute values, 3 times 2 is 6, times 1 is 6, times 1 is 6, times 2 is 12, times 3 is 36, times 1 is 36. So the answer is positive, positive 36. All right, and yeah, we'll use this idea when we look at powers of negative numbers as well. Okay, next time.